Have you ever wondered why some mid-market organizations just seem to scale effortlessly while others are perpetually stuck in an endless cycle of chaos? Well, in this explainer, we're going to do a complete architectural teardown of exactly why those operations break down, and more importantly, how to fundamentally restructure them. Okay, let's start by explicitly contradicting some conventional corporate wisdom here. Because buying shiny new tools or just asking your teams to work harder, that never cures an underlying systemic illness. When a process breaks, the knee-jerk reaction is almost always to assume, oh, we just need a newer platform, or we need more late nights from the staff. But actually, the causal mechanism of failure isn't a lack of effort, and it's definitely not a lack of technology. It is a total lack of structural architecture. So we really have to ask ourselves, why does standard management advice fail so spectacularly? The answer is pretty simple. It treats symptoms instead of actually mapping the structural root causes of all that organizational chaos. Conventional advice is kind of like a band-aid, right? It tells you to go run some team building exercises, fire an underperforming manager, or maybe bring in a motivational consultant. But those are purely superficial responses to deep systemic gaps. And there's this non-obvious but absolutely profound distinction between merely reacting to a crisis and architecting a decision framework that prevents it entirely. Treating symptoms means you're just constantly fighting fires. Structural governance, on the other hand, means you're designing the building so that fires literally cannot start in the first place. It's the difference between relying on sheer human willpower and relying on absolute causal mechanics. Let's explicitly name our first major structural vulnerability: the heroic founder trap. This happens when a company learns the entirely wrong lesson, that crises are managed by sheer effort rather than resilient systems. Think about it. When an organization faces a sudden departure or a massive operational bottleneck and the founder swoops in to save the day, sure, the immediate problem is solved. But a really dangerous precedent gets set. The organization learns to depend on a single human bottleneck for survival rather than on documented, repeatable processes. It's basically like replacing a load-bearing wall with one single highly stressed-out person. Which leads us right into our second named trap: gut-based purchasing blindness. This explicitly proves that inventory bottlenecks are absolutely never warehouse problems. They are upstream purchasing governance failures. Conventional advice tells you, hey, just reorganize your warehouse shelves to fix those back orders. But that is completely backwards. If a purchasing manager is walking the floor and reordering products simply because a bin looks low, you're structurally guaranteeing inventory stagnation. The failure actually occurs the exact moment human intuition overrides strict formulaic demand data. And our third failure mode names the exact reason digital transformations collapse: the integration debt spiral. This happens because organizations will fund a massive tool budget but then completely abandon their governance budget. A company buys an expensive piece of software, assumes the purchase itself is the transformation, and entirely ignores the human sequence required to actually adopt it. So what happens? When the new system doesn't seamlessly talk to the legacy systems, workforce distrust skyrockets, and everyone quietly goes right back to using their old, comfortable spreadsheets. Now, I want you to notice the hard line drawn here between the systems that make you money and the hidden systems that stop your business from completely unraveling. Most companies enthusiastically pour all of their focus into growth infrastructure: sales, marketing, product systems. But when a sudden disruption hits, it's the invisible resilience infrastructure, the succession plans, the documented authority matrices that dictates whether the organization actually survives the impact or just shatters into pieces. When we map out how a crisis builds, we see a very strict sequence. You see, a crisis is never caused by the triggering event itself. Instead, it follows this exact causal sequence of degrading an already fragile architecture. The trigger is really just the match. The unaddressed structural gap is the gasoline. When that sudden event finally occurs, it quickly overwhelms the founder's personal capacity to arbitrate, which then triggers a total cascading failure across all your operational departments. If we look specifically at the causal mechanics of software failure, we see exactly why an expensive new platform cannot manufacture human desire. It simply can't replace a dedicated adoption sequence. Buying a software license doesn't force your team to change their habits. When you skip that crucial governance phase, integration debt just silently accumulates in the background. Data gets duplicated, errors multiply, the team loses absolute faith in the new platform, and eventually, the whole multi-layered initiative just quietly dies. So the crucial point here is that when departmental visibility is absent, resource conflicts default entirely to the founder, and that creates an absolute bottleneck that destroys project timelines. This explains exactly why projects fail, regardless of the talent level of your project managers. If, say, two concurrent initiatives need the exact same engineering talent at the exact same time, and there's no documented matrix to decide which project wins, the work simply halts. Everyone just sits around waiting for the founder to make a ruling. This non-obvious distinction fundamentally proves that technology adoption is a human sequence, not an installation sequence. That is exactly why governance must always precede the purchase. Tool-first thinking is basically a very costly illusion. Governance-first thinking, on the other hand, forces leadership to build the structural cadences, define the actual adoption metrics, and assign clear executive sponsorship way before a single vendor contract is ever signed. Architecting decision governance, installing concrete conditional rules for operational sanity. Now that we've mapped those failure mechanisms, we're going to arm you with concrete conditional decision rules to actually install structural governance over the chaos. Let's tackle project management first. What exactly do we do when every project is finishing late, entirely regardless of the talent on the team? We already know that simply firing the project manager and hiring a new one is just going to restart the exact same cycle of failure. These conditional rules prove that execution stalls because the system inherently rewards urgency over structure, and only rigid capacity frameworks can fix it. If you're seeing these bottlenecks, you must install these exact protocols. If concurrent projects are competing for capacity, you enforce a rigid prioritization matrix. If scope changes keep derailing timelines, you establish strict escalation protocols that deliberately remove the founder from the arbitration loop. By implementing these rules, you stop that endless internal tug-of-war for talent, and you allow the team to execute based on agreed-upon criteria rather than just waiting around for executive permission. Shifting gears to our physical assets, we have to ask, how do we dismantle that deeply ingrained habit of gut-based purchasing? When your capital is completely tied up in products that just aren't moving, while your customers are furious about back orders on products they desperately want, how do we actually fix the root cause? This brutally honest rule means that if you rely on someone just looking at a bin to decide when to reorder, you are structurally mandating a cash flow crisis. You absolutely have to replace intuition with conditional triggers. If a specific item falls below a strictly data-driven threshold based on lead times and demand, only then does it trigger a reorder. Doing this completely removes human emotion and guesswork from your capital allocation. Finally, let's address the digital side and look at the exact rules required to prevent a disastrous tool-first failure. How do we actually ensure that the next major platform you roll out gets adopted and delivers the intended operational leverage? While if any of these observable conditions hold true, you must immediately pause and build the governance stack before you spend another dime on software. For instance, a passive executive sponsor is a massive red flag. If they aren't actively clearing obstacles, the rollout is doomed. Or if you're distributing bad data from a legacy system into a shiny new platform, you're really just automating the distribution of terrible information. You have to resolve that integration debt first. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact governance stack required to force change: authority, coordination, and truth, all working in tandem. The executive sponsor brings the weight to cut through resistance. The program office forces the rhythm and cadence so the initiative never loses its momentum. And finally, those adoption metrics strip away all the feelings and anecdotes, delivering the undeniable empirical truth about whether the workforce is actually changing their behavior. The overarching takeaway here is that implementing strict causal rules is literally the only way to free your team to actually do their jobs. I know, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? But rigid governance actually creates immense freedom. When the boundaries are crystal clear and the decision triggers are meticulously documented, your people can sprint forward with absolute confidence, rather than tiptoeing around waiting for an executive to tell them what to do. So, I'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider regarding your own structural foundations. Is your organization designed with the architectural resilience to scale, or is it merely surviving on the sheer willpower of its founders? I really hope this architectural breakdown changes how you view operational governance entirely. Remember, sustainable operations are never built on heroics, they are built on flawless execution architecture. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and we'll see you next time.